Welcome to another episode of the Institute for Conflicts IFC podcast, the Individuation podcast. I don't know why I'm saying the IFC's podcast. That is the IFC's podcast. The IFC's Individuation podcast. I should get that right. I've been doing it for like 2 years now. With me today, as always, our panel. Dr. Eric Tomlinson and Lisa Hong is with us today. And today, we are very, very excited about pointing up and down. We are very excited about Chapter 11, the upper and the underworld. And so we're going to read a fairy tale from the upper and the underworld. So before we start, Eric, you had something about last week's podcast.
Yeah,
we weren't sure about. You wanted to.
Montezuma and the Seven Caves. I just wanted to, because you had asked a question and I didn't have the answer for it.
Yeah.
And Lisa said, "Hey, the Aztec expert's supposed to know it." And so I went and found out.
Ooh.
And I wanted our listeners to know. And it was I wanted to know too. The numbers for the Aztecs meant something a little different than they do for us, as we would imagine. The number, because they use the number 3, 7, and 60. And Lahab asked the legitimate question of why in the world was he sending 60 against a much smaller number?
Ooh.
And the number 3 to the Aztecs represented cosmic fire.
Ooh.
The number 7 which was the number of caves, represents the divine character of the earth. And the number 60, come to find out, it's their base number. It's kind of like their ultimate number.
Ooh.
And it represents 3 sacred years. So it may very well have represented that this journey took 3 years.
Ooh.
So I thought that was interesting to find that out. So I wish I'd have known that for the podcast. I didn't, so I wanted to make sure everyone heard it. And I also wanted to.
So let's go back, Eric. Go back to the 7 caves. What are they representative of?
They're represented. They represent the divine character of the earth.
The divine character of the earth.
Right.
Which means exactly what?
Well, it means that, as we talked about last week, that Montezuma and his upper echelon of all the people that he sent on this journey, they see everything as spiritual. They see up in the air as spiritual. They see their ancestors in the past as spiritual. They really are focused on life on earth as being a spiritual realm rather than an earthly field. And even the earth itself has a divine character about it, which is why the whole point of the story was Montezuma and the 7 caves. And so everything to them, I don't know whether I'm sure they were on psychedelics, and because the jungle is filled with them. So I'm sure they, from ayahuasca to mushrooms to whatever, were very, very prominent in their world. So they explored that world. They explored that realm through any means they could. Dreams, substances, you name it. And his whole life was yes, as you pointed out, he got it wrong, but his whole life, Montezuma's whole life, was devoted to this. So I thought that's why I enjoyed the story so much, because they were a very interesting people, even though most people, some experts even called them, psychotic and barbarian cannibals, which of course is ridiculous. It's not what they were.
Well, I think one of the things that struck me was the sign they sent them to to tell them about what is coming, and they didn't see it. And I think this is the problem of evil. I think that when we think we're above something, we could control something, that we could dominate something, that we can see where other people can't see, and we could go where other people can't go, that we have some divine power. And I think every time we feel like we have some divine power, that's when evil arises.
It opens the door for it, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, it opens the door. And I was thinking of the problem of the Catholic Church today. And I think that's one of the downfalls. When you have feeling that you are more powerful than the forces that pretty much are the forces that we live by. Their rules, their unspoken laws, their unspoken territories that we need to be respectful of. And I think when we lose respect and sight for something, that's when evil arises. Because basically what we're doing is we're dismissing nature. And when you underestimate nature, then nature shows you a different path. And so when they came back and he saw them when the settlers came, when the Spanish came, and Montezuma saw them and thought they were the gods, that's when you lost your way. And that's when destruction came upon your head.
And their religion supported it. It supported them in viewing this unbridled power that they've had since the Catholic Church became sanctioned by Constantine in 333 AD.
Yeah.
And it dominated Europe until the Renaissance.
Yeah.
The power that lied in the hands of the priests prevented people from learning to read, learning to write. They could not have their own view of God and spirituality. And it wasn't because there was anything in the writings themselves that was bad. It was the power of those people who were in power and how they used that power to fuel their own greed and protect others in governmental power to do the same. They were in bed together for 1400 years in Europe.
Yeah.
And I don't have a problem saying it because I grew up, I was raised Catholic until I was old enough to think for myself. And I have people who are friends who are Catholic, and I dearly love them, and they're great people.
Yeah.
But they're not the ones in charge overseeing billions, hundreds of millions of dollars.
Yeah. I think it's a loss of perspective. I think you start to feel that you have a greater power on this planet than you do. And I think that's when you mess with the gods. What they talk about is messing with the gods, or waking the gods, or calling the gods out. In Greek mythology, the gods took out terrible punishments on people they felt like weren't worthy of acting like gods, because they weren't. So there are dynamic laws that regulate who is a god and what is a god and what is not a god.
And of course, to be fair, other Christian denominations have done very similar things.
Well, I think religion across the world has done damage beyond repair.
Right. And other world religions have as well.
Yeah.
I got to tell you one last thing about the Aztecs, though, if you don't
Yes.
mind.
Yes.
And that's because it bothered me that I couldn't figure out why Montezuma and his elite felt so superior to the common people because they didn't drink their pulque, their alcoholic beverage.
Ooh.
And as we know, in the history of mankind and in present day mankind, the number one drug of choice throughout the world has always been some form of alcohol.
Ooh.
A lot of that was because they could drink it without getting sick, because the alcohol killed the parasites and the bacteria. And especially in jungle areas, let an American go to any jungle area and start drinking water from their rivers. They won't live very long without boiling it or turning it into alcohol. And not to mention, alcohol is, as we all know, is kind of, especially for men, even more so than women, because of the way the male brain works. The male brain tends to think with one hemisphere at a time. The female brain tends to think with both hemispheres at the same time, which is why they tend to be more, the female brain tends to be more integrative with emotions and thought, and the male brain doesn't. But if you want to find out what a man is feeling, get him drunk. A drunk man will tell you things that he won't tell you when he's sober. It's kind of a truth serum because it's a central nervous system depressant. It relaxes the mind. That allows the emotional centers of the brain to stick some stuff in there, and they start saying things that they wouldn't otherwise say. So I'm thinking, why in the world, how did they avoid this? This is unusual. And then I remembered that chocolate has a chemical in it called phenethylamine. Now, I've always known that that had some relation to relaxation, serotonin, but I didn't know it literally operated as a neurotransmitter in the brain. And here's what I found out from studying. I think for those who don't already know this, they're going to find it very interesting. Because the world has a bit of an addiction for chocolate. We all know that. It acts as a neurotransmitter, and it blocks the main three neurotransmitters in the brain that deal with behavior and emotion and all kinds of other systems in the brain. And that's serotonin, which is viewed as, in general, the natural tranquilizer of the cell, of all the cells in our body that carry it. Norepinephrine, which gives us energy. It's what goes up when we take speed or amphetamine. And finally, dopamine, the pleasure or feel-good neurotransmitter. And ironically, phenethylamine in chocolate blocks them at the neurotransmitter synapse. And initially, it keeps them from operating, but then pools of it build up. And then when the phenethylamine is no longer working, or as it's toning itself down, those floods of neurotransmitters start affecting the different systems in the brain. And you feel good, you have a little bit more energy, and you at the same time even feel a little relaxed. Montezuma drank 30 to 50 cups of this stuff a day. No wonder he didn't need to drink some nasty tasting liquor. So I thought that was fascinating, and I just thought maybe our listeners might want to hear that.
Yeah, I mean, it's what they use in antidepressants, right? They try to regulate serotonin and norepinephrine and dopamine, and that's how they use antidepressants to that. Anyway, so we do know that chocolate is a natural antidepressant, and now Eric has explained to us why it is scientifically. Lisa,
I hope
you've
that
been
was
quiet.
interesting.
I'm sorry, Eric, go on.
I just said I hope that was interesting.
No, it was very interesting. Lisa, go on. You haven't said anything. You want to say
Peanut
anything?
gallery right now.
You wanna
No,
say
no, the
anything?
whole chocolate thing's really interesting. I've had that effect on myself.
Lisa, put down that pint of Haagen-Dazs chocolate right now.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's get into our topic today. So I want to start out by quoting from von Franz's book, The Archetypal Symbols and Fairy Tales. In the fairy tale, A Legend of Flowers and How Montezuma Sought the Seven Caves, she says, the unconscious is viewed as the land of the ancestors and as the original homeland, which, as the Christian concept of paradise was lost. Certain tales of natural peoples helps us better to discern the aspect of the unconscious described as the original home, the place where people tarried before they were born in a creation story of Wero, tribe of Guinea, South America. The legend of Oknart, we learn. So this is the fairy tale, and Lisa, is this the fairy tale you're going to read to us today?
Yeah, fairy tale world
Yeah.
in reaching ancient lands and discovering new ones.
Mm-hmm.
The legend of Okonorote. Am I saying that right, Eric? You're the expert here.
Okonoro.
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 Oh, Okonorote. Got it. Thank you.
No.
All right. So Waro is a group of people or tribal people who live on rivers and estuaries in South America called boat people. So all Waro are descendants of Okonorot, the primordial hunter, an adventurous heavenly figure. This man originally dwelt in the sky world, which was inhabited by people, but was completely devoid of all animals except birds. One day, while out hunting these heavenly birds, Okonorot's arrows struck his target, but then both bird and arrow disappeared. When he went to search for them, he discovered a deep pit and looked in. And he, fascinated, unable to move, saw daylight beneath him as well as above. There, far, far below, he could see forests grow, wide plains and savannas where rivulets flow, and he looked down for hours those new wonders to view, thinking, all is a dream, sure it cannot be. Okonoro went back to his people and convinced them to make a long rope. It took months to prepare, but was at last finished, and the hero mustered his courage and made the descent. 'Twas a perilous adventure to come from above by ladder so frail, which light currents could move. And when he was down, he stood gazing around in utter amazement at all the things he found. The fire so abundant, he saw with surprise, the quadrupeds strange and their wonderful size. He shot a young deer, and with even greater effort than before, he climbed back up to the sky world with his catch. When he told his people of what he had found and showed them the deer, they realized what fortune, for they had no such meat. So they asked no permission, but said, we will go, and came down the rope ladder to this world below. Things then were young. No old people were found. Small children they carried, and all reached the ground. All but one made it down to the new world. An old woman who was evidently quite corpulent became stuck in the hole after all others had passed through. There was a big discussion among those down on earth about what to do with this woman. There was general agreement that it was not right to leave her there, but to rescue her would mean the death of their strongest men. So the woman remains, though the ladder gave way, and will always remain there, our old Waro say. She fills up the hole, and, good friends, that is why we can never get a fair peep through the sky. So,
what do you think of the story, Lisa?
they've got a funny sense of humor. I don't know. But it seems fitting that the oldest late woman there is the one to offer them a new beginning and a new world,
Mm.
in a way.
Yeah, and to cut them off from the old world.
And cut them off from the old world.
Part of this is a creation myth, right?
Yeah.
So we understand this as a creation myth, and this is, if you think about it, we've had a couple of stories like this. There's a birth canal that the people come from, and then they populate the underworld, or in this case, the earth, because they lived in the heavens. Now, both the heavens and the underworld represent the unconscious from two different aspects: the upper world and the underworld. What we talked about as the conscious world or the physical world is different. Where they go is from the upper world, they go vice versa. They move from the heavens, which is the unconscious, to the conscious place, where there are trees, where there are animals, where they could hunt. But with that, they give up the unconscious. So they give up paradise. And then thus paradise is lost because they can't get back to it, because the old woman blocks the path. So corpulent is big, basically. That she was blocking it because she was so big. It's symbolic of that once you descend from the underworld, once you come back and descend into the physical world or the corporal world, what happens is that the door behind you shuts. You never enter in the same door. That is always in the stories. Whatever door you choose, whenever you fall asleep, you enter through a different door. Although the pathway to the underworld is through sleep, is through the unconscious, every time you enter the underworld, you enter from a different door because it's vast. You never, ever go through the same door twice. And this is the magnificent thing of the underworld. It's so vast. It's not a place where it's like a couple miles or a planet. It's vast. It's infinite. So when you leave that and you go back to the physical world, here they move to the physical world. It's a creation myth. They have left that expansive. They became conscious of an idea in the unconscious. They held on to it. That was the arrow that hits the bird. The bird falls with the arrow, falls on the land where you see trees, where you see animals, where you could hunt more. So that's the treasure. Because they always hunt birds, but the birds don't fall out of the sky onto the ground. They fall into the clouds. Because it's symbolic, right? The transformative process is symbolic. This is gold. This is when you find gold. This is the hidden treasure. You find the hidden treasure, but you can't take the treasure with you. That's always a dilemma. If you go chasing after it, you forget what you found. And that's always been the case. So here it
I have a
says,
question for,
yeah, go for
I
it.
have a question for you and Lisa. I read another version, couple of other versions of the story, and in one of the other versions doesn't talk about here, it's Okanoro kept trying he saw this bird of beautiful, unsurpassed beauty. And it said for a long, in the other version, he tried over and over and over and over again to kill it, and he couldn't. And it was at the end of a long journey before he finally killed the bird. So I think that's significant.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And I wanted to ask you and Lisa what y'all thought about that addendum to the story.
Well, Lisa, what do you think?
Well, I think Lahab just explained it, the chasing of the dream, the chasing of the ultimate, the unicorn, so to speak. In that yields the culmination or discovery of something else that you didn't know you were looking for. And so that when he was hunting that bird over and over and failed and became so focused on the actual hunt, but it really didn't mean much. It was just almost random, just happened to lead him to another world, and which was ultimately transformational.
So seeing something so beautiful and wanting to kill it, killing is the ultimate act of betrayal, right? But it's also the ultimate act of awakening. Something has to die for something to be reborn. So the idea of paradise has to die. So the idea of living on the land is born. The idea of not living in infinity has to die for you to be able to live as a being on the earth. And so when he kills that idea, he's killing an idea, he's finding a treasure. He's going into the cave, he finds the treasure, he tries to grab it, and the walls start to collapse. And the only way out is that you have to run, and you can't carry the treasure with you. But you are so close. So he kills this beautiful bird, but he forgets about the bird, right, Eric? He forgets about the bird because he suddenly is enamored by the deer. There are deer. Who cares about the birds anymore? Right? So this is the transformational element, right? It makes you forget what you came for. You came searching for one thing, you found something else, and you left. As anybody who's gone into a bookstore knows, you go searching for one thing, you leave the bookstore with a completely different thing. You never went to the bookstore for that thing.
Yeah.
100% of the time. Unless it was a Harry Potter book and somebody was guiding you there. That's not you. Somebody else had to guide you there. So that also happens in fairy tales. Somebody else has to guide you there and tell you what to pick up, tell you what to take. Because if they don't, you stray. So in all the movies where you have the mummies and the caves and the pyramids, in all those, you come in and you're looking for one object and you see the treasure. And suddenly what happens? You become greedy. Now you want the whole thing. Why can't I have the whole thing? This is what we were talking about, that there are laws of nature, laws of the universe, unseen laws. You could take one thing, you cannot take everything. And the genies in the lamp, you get 3 wishes. One of the wishes cannot be for more wishes. And usually the 3rd wish negates the 1st and 2nd. So you start out with like, I want more money than anybody. Well, now you have more money than anybody. Everybody else is poor. So money doesn't mean anything. because nobody else has it, so nobody can deal with you. Then you say, you know, I want to be rich, I want to be famous, whatever, and everybody knows you, but nobody likes you. Then you wish to just be yourself again and not be known in this way, because the wishes have gone horribly wrong. So the third wish is to restore you because it's greed, temptation, greed. So these are the laws of the universe. There's always temptation and there's always greed. And there's always a price to pay for temptation and greed. If you take temptation on with your greed, then there's a price to pay. That's a heavy price. But you're always tempted. You're always tempted by the treasure. Whether it's knowledge, whether it's anything, you're always tempted. You're always tempted to take everything and walk out. As anybody who's packed for a trip knows, you don't need everything. You don't need everything. You're only there for a specific period of time. And now you have a lot of luggage and you have 2 or 3 days. So you have to deal with the luggage. You don't enjoy the trip because you took too much shit. And you have to lug the luggage through large airports, into taxi cabs, into hotel rooms. You had to unpack them, then you had to repack them. And you barely used a quarter of them. So these are the things that we have to abide by in the universe. Because if we don't abide by them, then we get stuck. It's like you're getting stuck in the hall of mirrors. 1 minute you look at yourself and you see yourself twice as big. 1 minute you look at yourself and you see yourself so small. 1 minute you look at yourself, you see yourself so tall, right? And this is also, it's also part of development. As the ego develops, the ego sees itself in different ways. When you're young and you're strong, pretty, successful, you know, you don't see yourself as old or weak or sick or a failure. So consciousness is always limited. This is development. So in the development of consciousness, when you start to chase the object and you catch it, what happens when you catch it? You forget what you were chasing. Every single time you forget what you're chasing. And every time you take more, so hunting, if you take more, then you're killing. You're no longer hunting. If you take more than you need, these are the laws of the universe. Here, Von Franz goes on to say, this descent of the world from their home in the sky through a hole reminds one of giving birth. The process appears to indicate a descent into everyday reality. The absence of all animals except birds most likely relates to the concept that only air beings resides in the heavens. Presumably, all the people there were bird-like beings. As we will later show, bird signifies spiritual contents of the unconscious. Leaving the original homeland and the descent down to the earth signifies the beginning of human consciousness. which depicts a development out of the animal instinctual unconscious state and a coming into being that was only anticipated in the previous life spent in a kind of dream-like state. So it's like waking up from the dream and finding yourself somewhere else, and you're kind of disoriented. So you want to go back into the dream, but now you can't fall asleep because the door is closed. The path that you came through has been shut. You cannot go back into that moment. You cannot enter the fairy tale where you left off. And every time you enter, you enter it from a different reality. Consciousness is never the same. This is why trauma becomes so problematic. Because trauma makes you conscious of things that you're not ready to face. It's too much. And that's why the brain disassociates. That's why it splits off. But within that consciousness, although it's violent, something is born. You cannot go back to what was there before. But this is kind of, this is the life process. This is growth. You're never going to be a baby again. That's a moment that occurred. That moment will always be present, but you can never go back to that moment. It exists, but you can't be there. You could only reflect back to these moments in hindsight. You're always thinking backwards. When you're daydreaming and when you're fantasizing, you're thinking forwards. But are you really thinking backwards or forwards? No. These are different doorways into the unconscious. You just haven't thought about them as different doorways. Consciousness is like a look behind the curtain. So what happens when you leave after you looked? Is it still there? Your mind doubts it. Is the same thing there that I left behind? Is the same thing there that I discovered many years ago? As we know from reading books, every time you read a book, you have a different consciousness about it. Some of it sounds like you've read before. Like, yeah, I kind of read that. But there's always a new consciousness about what you read. So I've read these young books before, but I don't see them the same way. Every time I open them, I see something different, right? It's just my thought is, she says here, it appears therefore that heaven is not much different in its essence from the underworld and is clearly the world of the unconscious. So the water is the unconscious. The mountains are the unconscious. You see, there's a theme here. The forests are the unconscious. The desert is the unconscious. Why is the desert the unconscious? Because you have unlimited sky. The heavens are the unconscious. So what is consciousness? Consciousness is a brief glimpse. It's a peek. Now you see it, tomorrow it's gone. Your idea of consciousness is gone. It's never the same. The more you look into something, they say, okay, you're going down a rabbit hole. You know why you're going down a rabbit hole? You're going into the unconscious. So the more you dig, the more you find. The more you find, the more you have to leave behind to get to what you're looking for. That's the trick. That's the law. The law is you have to leave what you find, even though it's interesting, because that's not what you went looking for. To be able to bring that thing back from the unconscious, to bring it back from the heavens, to bring it back from the cosmos, to bring it back from the forest, to bring it back from the clashing rocks and the falling waves and the oceans and the rivers. Consciousness, treasure, foresight, magic, connection. What are we looking for? What do we think we're looking for? What is that all people seek? Knowledge, immortality. They're all the same thing. We want knowledge of our existence. That only changes to immortality when we think we have knowledge of our existence. Then we start chasing another thing. It's going down the rabbit hole. At least that's my thought.
I just want peace, harmony.
And good food.
Mm.
That would always be good.
I've always found it interesting that even though we can't go back, how, whether one wants to call it an unconscious or subconscious level, what do a lot of people do when they're extremely ill or depressed or suffering trauma of some kind? They get on their bed or get on the floor and they curl up in a fetal position.
Mm.
You know, they want to go back.
Mm.
And they're not even thinking about, oh gosh, I wish I was in my mother's womb, but they just instinctively curl up in a fetal position.
Mm.
I've always found that fascinating.
We always go back to the original position that we came through. If you think about it, it's like, how many times have you heard the term, and I found them curled up? You found them curled up because they're seeking that which they've lost. Paradise. That was paradise. That was where I lived in oblivion. You know, when you come into the world, you're screaming and yelling. It's a traumatic event, by the way. Somebody's pulling at you, somebody's talking to somebody. You're being held up by your legs. It's a traumatic event. You realize how tiny you are very quickly and how big everything is around you. Traumatic event. But before that happens, you were living in the cosmos. You were living in the heavens. You were living in the forest. You were living in the dream. You were living in the fairy tale. You were living in the spirit world. You were living in the skies, in the water. Even though von Franz talks about this world quickly transforms into the underworld, depending on where you are in this world, which means that you're only conscious of this world until you go into the underworld. You're no longer conscious of it. And because we go into the underworld all the time, Lisa seeks peace. That's the underworld. Harmony, calmness. That's the underworld. That's where the underworld is. Chaos, action, adventure. That's the underworld too.
I like the fact that you brought out that it's both, because a lot of times people only think it's the one, and
No.
it's not. Interestingly enough, if I may
Yeah,
take
yeah.
a moment, if I may take a moment to explain this, I would love to have seen this story written, you know, because Lisa and I were talking about at the beginning that these people have been around since 5000 BC
Mm.
on the Orinoco River, which is a tributary, a major tributary, and it goes through Guyana and Venezuela. And not only in that part of the jungle, but also the Aztecs had these all around them too. They're called cenotes, C-E-N-O-T-E. There are these big, gigantic openings in the earth.
Mm.
And when you look down in them, if you ever get a chance to see a Nova special on them, you got to see it. They're just breathtaking. But these openings in the earth, you can see them in a helicopter above the jungle. You can see these little circles. And when you look down in them, it's just this breathtaking, sparkling, beautiful water. It's another world. And then sometimes, Lahab and Lisa, sometimes they're without water, and they're several hundred feet deep. And you look down there and there's this lush jungle environment with all kinds of animals. And the first time people see them, oh my gosh, this is supposed to be where it's evil and chaotic and you die. And there's these breathtaking landscapes down here, hundreds of feet down. And what did they do? They built ladders to climb down in them.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that have been something if they had seen those? Because it's like a duplicate of going from the sky to the earth. Now they're going from the sky into the earth. It's kind of a repeat of the story.
That's exactly right. It's always on repeat. You're always replaying the same episode.
I like that.
That's exactly right. You're always replaying the same episode, even though you think it's a different episode.
Yeah.
Every time you go back to sleep, you're replaying the episode. The episode is the journey into the underworld. That's the episode. When you take a nap, when you are staring out a window and you go somewhere far away and somebody goes, hey, where are you? And you're like, oh, I'm back. Where did you go? I'm not sure. I mean, I spaced out, we say. I spaced out. What are you thinking about? I spaced out. It's a repeat episode. It's going back in time over and over again because time does not exist in the underworld.
Yeah, I love what you did with that. I really I appreciate that. That's good.
Right? This time doesn't exist. Time is a construct. It's a construct that we use to make sense of things that we don't understand.
Can I eat some Haagen-Dazs now, Lob?
Yes, absolutely. I thought you wanted Lisa to eat Haagen-Dazs. How did you end up with Haagen-Dazs?
Lisa ate hers before we started.
You started with her. Are you eating Haagen-Dazs? And suddenly now you want to eat Haagen-Dazs. Go ahead.
I know. She's affected me.
You know, Haagen-Dazs does not sponsor our show, so we should not give like free airtime to anybody.
Okay, then Breyers. How's that?
Chocolate ice
Breyers
cream.
doesn't.
That's what we're really talking about. We want chocolate ice cream.
My favorite is Chunky Monkey.
No, it's really that beautiful. It's that beautiful chocolate mahogany wood paneling that she's got in her house that made me think of chocolate. I mean, look at it. It's just gorgeous. Nice shot of it too. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric.
So the unconscious, the underworld, the remote, faraway places, the heavens. It says often, the underworld as the beyond is differentiated from heaven, that the evil ones live below, the good ones live above. The evil ones live below, the good ones live above. So those who live below are not conscious. Those who live above are conscious. So consciousness here, as the Christian concept of heaven and hell declares, is good. And the unconscious is bad, evil. But if you are constantly going into the conscious, into the unconscious, and back into consciousness, how do you know? How do you know you're awake? How do you know you're not dreaming yourself? How do you know? Those are part of the laws of the universe. How do you know? There are things in the universe that take precedent. They let you see behind the door, but one door at a time. And if they let you see far behind the door, then you have more questions than answers. So every physicist knows, as soon as they discover something, they have more questions than answers. They were looking for something, they discovered it. They're like, oh, it's right there. I see it. As soon as they see it, then it's like it opens up this whole vast view of, well, this opens up so many questions. I mean, yeah, we found this, but this just opened up a whole new problem. So the more you find out, the more you understand, the more you become conscious, the more questions arise. The less you question, the less you understand, the more problems arise. That's when evil arises. Evil arises because of the banality of people that refuse to see, not calling something out becomes evil after a while. The first act is not always evil. It's the act that you become conscious of what has been done that becomes evil. So the first time the mother hits the child in front of you, that's not necessarily evil. It looks wrong, it doesn't look right. But if you know that mother is violent, now you are participating in evil. This is the problem. This is why it has to be called out. You know, people who say, I can't save the world. Well, it's not true. This world exists as a symbol in our consciousness. And if we want to save it, we can. And if we want to destroy it, we can. And if we want to enslave it, we can. And if we want to burn it down, we can. It exists as a concept in our psyche. It makes me think of these kids who talk about climate change, talk about education, about resources, about what the world doesn't have, about those who have it and refuse to share it. Where does their consciousness come from? They're so young. Because they're born into the world seeing it for what it is. And so when they say we're running out of time, they're talking about the world they see, they live in. The world we've neglected that we live in is lost. And it always returns to the idea of paradise, how we ruin paradise, how we lost paradise. We lose paradise because we no longer see it as important. We see it as a commodity. Anytime we look at this world as a commodity of exchange, in conversation, in friendship, in connection, in love, in business, every time we look at it as a commodity, we lose something from this world. We lose a piece of us.
It changes our humanity. It really does.
Exactly. And humanity is all about being connected. It's being connected to the people around us. It's being connected to the trees, to the birds. It's being connected to those who need and those who have, and those who want to give, those who want to take. It's being connected. You can't check out, and you can't say, it's not my problem. Anytime you say it's not my problem, that means it's your problem. Anytime you think it's not your problem, it's your problem. It's your biggest problem. Otherwise, your psyche wouldn't have said it's not my problem. Your psyche just made you conscious of your problem. Every person who says that the environment is not a problem is the problem. Every single time. Democracy is not my problem. It is the utmost problem. Women's right is not a problem. It is the biggest problem. Children's rights are not a problem. You see how this goes? It's like a domino.
And I'm glad you mentioned those two, because those are the two biggest problems that exist on our planet. The treatment of women and the treatment of children. All you have to do, you don't have to believe me. I don't expect anybody to believe that. Just do the research. It's
Well,
always
it causes more death. It causes more chaos and death and destruction among those who say it's not my problem, which is the men of the world. It causes more destruction. It causes more war. It causes more rage. It causes more environmental destruction. Because basically, if we do not value that which we see as inferior to us or weaker than us, or that we have dominance over, if we cannot respect that thing, then we basically destroy ourselves. And we've done that with the trees. We've done that with water. We've done that with
people don't think, a lot of the general population don't think that these problems are that big. They know they're horrible problems and they believe they're horrible problems. They don't understand the magnitude of them. In this country alone, 30,000 teenage girls a year are sexually either raped or assaulted on college campuses alone.
Yeah.
Alone.
Yeah. And that is an infection that will destroy us all.
It's a horrible disease.
It's an infectious disease that multiplies and destroys entire. I mean, we work with people who have suffered severe traumas. We've worked with several people who have been the receivers of those traumatic incidents. And to not believe that that affects you, the treatment of it alone takes a chunk out of you. Even though it wasn't your problem, it actually is. Because when we stand up, when we recognize, when we call out, when we defend, when we say this is right and that's wrong, then we are confronting our problems. It's the only time we confront our problems. Call it out. Say that's not right. Because that continues the decay. This is a web that we all create. This is our web. And if you know anything about a web, when you start cutting lines that hold the web together, breaking them, destroying them, violating them, attacking them, killing them, imprisoning them, raping them, then the web falls apart. We have created the biggest problems on this planet, and there's only us to solve them. The fantasy is that somebody else is going to come and solve it for us. You are Wonder Woman, you are Superman. There is no other. This is our home. These are our sisters and brothers. These are our children. I was watching this show called The In-Betweener. He's basically a low-level enforcer, has a daughter. His brother looks like he suffered a really bad stroke. He doesn't talk to his father. But he keeps burying people and killing people. Supposedly they're evil. But the more I watched this show, the more the banality of evil kept hitting me. Goes out into the woods and makes them dig a grave and then shoots them and throws them in the grave and then throws hot water in somebody's face to burn their face. It's these acts over and over and over again across this planet that eat away at us. Like cancer. That's the cancer. The cancer is outside. Everything that you do to hurt something out there, that's the cancer. That's the cancer that will keep eating away at you. Do good. Extend yourself. Help. Stand up. Don't be scared. It's a short ride. And I want us to be able to go into the next stage in the afterlife. Saying, I did what I needed to do in this life. That's always the task of the fairy tale. The task of the fairy tale is, what did you do? What did you achieve? What did you learn? What did you know? What did you find out? Fairy tales are wisdom, like science and philosophy and psychology. Fairy tales are stories about us, about our existence on this planet, how we treat this planet, how we think of this planet, how we think of our existence in the cosmos. We are quanta. We are particles of energy that are conscious. In the quanta can be seen as both a wave, and a particle. And there's a pattern. It has a pattern that's deep within it. From the smallest to the largest, we are part of this fabric that is called the universe, the cosmos. That we need to be conscious of. Because if we become conscious that we are part of this fabric, that we were part of this web, then we know not to tear our neighbor down. We know not to hurt the thing that can't defend itself. We know that we need to protect those things that cannot protect themselves. Just a thought. Was I being morbid, Lisa?
I mean, you said a lot in that last little soliloquy there that was very meaningful, and not that you don't in others, but you really talked. I felt like you were talking a lot about personal responsibility and
Cosmic.
Pardon?
Cosmic responsibility.
Well, I think it helps people to start off with viewing cosmic responsibility as at a ground level called personal responsibility.
Okay.
A lot of people can't jump. They're not familiar enough to jump to cosmic responsibility. And personal responsibility is something that people can practically understand. And here's what I found out in the 3.5 years that I moved back down here to Florida. Everywhere I go, whatever kind of store it is, even if it's a Jiffy store, I always reach out to the people in there, whether it's the people in line, whether it's the people behind the desk or the cash register, and I always try to talk to them the way a friend would. And I have found in the last 3.5 years, about 20 to 30% of those people, they don't look at me, they shrug, they could give a you know what, they basically want me to leave them the hell alone, so I do. But what I've also found is that the majority of those people, 70 to 80%, best of my recollection, is appreciate it, are happy about it, needed it. I mean, even to the point where people have tried to pay for whatever I was in line for because of a 5-minute conversation, or they want to hold the door open for me out of gratitude that somebody took the time to make them important enough to ask them about themselves. And that's I do the same thing when I see people pulled off on the side of the road. Ask them if they need help. Do they need a jump? Do they need to use a phone? Whatever. 20 to 30% won't even look at me. The others are very grateful. No, I've got it covered. Thank you. I got a phone. Appreciate you stopping. And all I'm saying is that even if we just start at that place alone, it makes a difference in the world. And everybody who does that in like kind makes a difference. And it affects a community, it affects a town, it affects a city. Then it starts reaching on a cosmic level that's undeniable. And I just wanted to throw that out there. It's just, I'm compelled to do it. I don't do it for any other reason than I'm compelled to. And I'm glad I am. And the rejections don't bother me anymore.
Well, it's not rejection, it's just fear.
Well,
It's just fear of acceptance of that I might need something from somebody. That's what it is. It's not rejection. It's just fear that I might actually, I might not be able to do things on my own that I actually, and it's a.
Also, it could be fear of self, accepting self and valuing self. Oh, someone thinks I'm valuable. No, I don't know if I'm valuable. that we're not going to engage there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a,
But yeah,
it's a huge
you're
problem.
both are saying the same thing though. Small altruistic offerings right now, today, in whatever level of participation, identifying something, calling something out, offering something, bringing people in. All of that are chips in the cosmic game of making
Correct.
everything better.
Correct.
Yes. Yeah, and Dr. Bruce Perry used to always tell me in our staff meetings, he just loved the movie Dances with Wolves. And he said, even if you can't impact somebody in some kind of direct, major way, he said, just think of what Kevin Costner did with that wolf. He just stood there. He didn't move. He didn't go toward him. He just stood there with some food in his hand. And it took a long time of systematic desensitization, but eventually the wolf came to him and grabbed the food out of his mouth. Maybe those 20% of people who are afraid to engage don't engage with me. Maybe that happens to them by 3 or 4 other people, and guess what? They start feeling more comfortable with it. They start opening up to that possibility. But it takes a village. It takes a village of people doing those kinds of things to have that kind of global impact.
It's nice to hit the 70, 80, but it's actually the 20, 30% that really needs to be touched on again and again and again. Because it's those 20, 30% that live in isolation and fear. And that's where.
And their numbers increase.
Yeah, the recycling of abuse, of anger, of acting out in ways that are dysfunctional.
Yeah.
That's the part that needs to be stopped, is those 20, 30%.
They absolutely are the ones that are the most in need.
Mm-hmm.
The 70 to 80% though still need it themselves.
Oh yeah.
They still need that shot in the arm. They still need a boost. They still need a reminder. They still need the encouragement. But you're right, the 20 to 30% are the ones that are really, really hurting and need it the most.
So I think in today's lingo, that would be pass it forward. What do they call that?
Pay it forward.
Pay it forward. Give it to somebody who needs it. Let them move that towards something that they might see somebody else needing. And that connection, that vibration, that I am my brother's keeper, that I'm my sister's keeper, that we are each other's keeper, that we each other make each other better. With that, I would like to sign off.
Thank you for bringing that up, Lahab, though.
Oh, you're welcome. Go on.
Very grateful to you for doing that.
No, I've been thinking about the problem of evil. And what strikes me as evil is when nobody does anything and it becomes evil. That's how evil takes root. People look away. People act like it's not their concern. It's not their problem. It's somebody else's. Oh, that's a police matter. That's a political matter. That's a philosophical matter. What the fuck? When did we become so terrified of being connected that now we run and hide from each other because we're afraid of each other?
Yeah.
That creates evil. Those gaps, that fear. We know this from treating pain, trauma, hurt, long years of negative self-talk. It creates evil that's taken out on the individual. They end up being hurt more and more and more and more. With that, This is the IFC's Individuation podcast. I am Dr. Lahab Al-Samarrai. With me is Dr. Eric Tomlinson and Lisa Hong, and we will be back next week with a more uplifting podcast. I know I promise that every week. A funnier podcast, a more interesting podcast. Next week, we will dive into the movie Tenet with John David Washington, Denzel Washington's son. He is a magnificent actor in his own right, and Kenneth Branagh. And we will be talking about the movie and what the story is and what the fairy tale tells us about the world. Lisa, Eric, you want to say goodbye to everybody?
Bye,
Thanks.
everyone. Have a great weekend.
Thank you to everyone listening. We hope you have enjoyed it and been enriched by it in some way.
All right. Adios. Till next week.